Okay, hello. My name's David Hall, and today I'm going to be interviewing Professor David Adger. This is supposed to be the first in a series of interviews where PhD students at Queen Mary in the Linguistics Department interview their supervisors. This is just to give you guys a taster of what kind of research they do individually, but also as we're trying to give you an insight into what the department does as a whole as well. So Professor Adger joined Queen Mary in 2002 as a reader in linguistics before being promoted to professor in 2006. And he was the head of the School of Language, Linguistics and Film for 2 years until September this year.
Yes.
And
now I'm a free man.
Right, yeah, he's on a well-deserved sabbatical break, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And David is a supervisor of a number of PhD students. How many is it now?
I think, including second supervisor, I think it's just 5 right now, but at points during my time at Queen Mary, it's been 7.
Been up to 7, okay, right. And that includes me. And
obviously the worst of them all,
yes,
right?
Of course, yep. And yeah, so we're just going to ask a few questions. Well, I am just going to ask you a few questions about your work. So first of all, I'd like you to give us a kind of general overview of where you would place your work in the very broad field of linguistics. So which sub-discipline would you say that you're involved in, and what does your work try to describe or explain?
So fundamentally, I'm a theoretical syntactician, so I'm really interested in what it is about the human mind that extracts patterns from the language data that it surrounds it and turns it into some kind of a capacity which is then used to generate sentences so people can say whatever they think. And I think that it's really fascinating and incredibly important subject because it's probably one of the only ways, one of the best ways, that we human beings can get an insight into the relationship, basically into how people think, into what thought is. And language is a really brilliant way to just get into what thought is. And one of the things about syntax which makes it so important is it's combinatorial. That is, it's some kind of a system which is clearly finite in nature because our brains are finite, but yet seems to be able to generate a range of sentences and sentence types which is so incredibly vast it doesn't seem sensible to put any limits on it. So some people say that it's an infinite amount, but that gets us into strange philosophical problems, but basically it's so vast that the only way really to deal with it is by saying that what we do is we extract from the data we hear as kids and we something which we then turn into a generative device in a sense which allows us then to create language to use it when we need to use it.
Okay.
So that's basically what I'm really interested in, is that aspect of things. But actually what I've spent a lot of time doing is looking at not just that aspect of syntactic theory per se, but really how syntax relates to all sorts of other aspects of language. So in my thesis, I was interested in the relationship. That's a long time ago, back in the early 90s, and it was called Functional Categories and Interpretation, and it was looking at the relationship between syntactic categories like agreement and tense and definiteness and stuff like that, and their semantic interpretation, and that ended up actually going into aspects of discourse. So I looked at discourse representation theory, as well as looking at morphology. So I've always been interested in how syntax, not just how it works itself, but how it connects to all sorts of other aspects. And I sort of see it as the center of linguistics. It's the thing that holds all the rest of the stuff together. Okay,
I see. And so more specifically, what are you currently working on?
That's a bit of a hard question because I just stopped being head of school, and during the 2 years I was head of school I did nothing but
what do you hope to work
budgets and human resources. So there's a bunch of things that I wrote a book a few years back called The Syntax of Substance, and that laid out a new theory of phrase structure, of the structure of sentences. And there's lots of little aspects of that theory which need expanded on, which need fixed. There are little problems in it which I think, whose solution I think could be really interesting. So there's a pile of things there that I'm interested in. more specifically, I'm interested in the syntax of determiner phrases, and interestingly, almost all of my PhD students currently are working on some aspect of the syntax of determiner phrases, including David.
Yep.
And that's been actually extremely exciting for me to have a bunch of people doing quite different projects from the projects I'm interested in, but all on the same kind of general area, because it sort of feels like there's a little group of people all focusing on the same project, even if they're looking at it from different perspectives. So that's one thing I want to do, is really to sort of solve some problems that arose out of the theory in my book. Another thing I was involved in, and I will do a bit more of again, is the relationship. Is this work that I've been doing since I was in York, in connecting syntactic theory to the concerns of sociolinguists who are interested in individual variability in language. So, for many years, syntacticians took very seriously Chomsky's injunction that what syntactic theory was about was ideal speaker hearers in homogeneous speech communities. But I think that actually our theory is good enough now, and the sociolinguistic data is interesting enough now that we're able to connect those in ways which was more difficult perhaps in the past. So there's some new work that I want to do with Jennifer Smith, looking at acquisition of variable categories in Buckie, which is the tiny little village on the northeast coast of Scotland. So that'll be another thing I'll be working on. Another thing I'm interested in right now is artificial language learning work. So part of this work that I've been doing touches tangentially, the purely syntactic work touches tangentially on what's known as Greenberg's Universal 20, which is a general set of constraints on how noun phrases work in languages of the world. And it turns out, if you look typologically, that some patterns in noun phrases are very, very common, and other ones are very rare, and some of them just don't exist. Right. So Jenny Culbertson and I, Jenny's a psycholinguist really, who was working in the States and has now moved to Edinburgh. We did some work on essentially inventing languages, like little mini languages, just looking at the structure of noun phrases, and then trying to teach the kind of impossible ones to people. I mean, I'm massively simplifying, but the idea was then to see whether people are able to learn the typologically very rare ones in a different way than they learn the typologically common ones. And we haven't done this yet, but are they able at all to learn the ones that don't exist? So we're going to push that work a bit further forward. That's psychological work. And actually, I've been talking to Marcus Pearce, who is director of the EEG lab here at Queen Mary, and we're going to it's a plan to extend that work and look at brain scans as well, to see to the extent to which different parts of our neurological anatomy are utilized in attempting to analyze very common linguistic patterns versus linguistic patterns which are presumed or theoretically predicted not to exist. So that's another area that I'm interested in looking at, and I'm sure there's a bunch more. I'm doing some work in predication in Scottish Gaelic. I didn't say that a lot of my empirical work over the years has been on Scottish Gaelic, which is the language I worked on extensively for my PhD and also after that. So I'm doing some work on nominal predication, again noun phrases, and that stems off of work I've been doing over the last few years on predication in Scottish Gaelic. And I'm thinking of also doing some work with Gillian Ramchand in Tromsø, who I've worked with in the past, and we're going to be looking at linearization algorithms about how syntactic structures relate to linear order using Scottish Gaelic, which has some very interesting properties in this area, as a sort of test case for the theories that we design. So actually,
so not much going on then.
2 years that I've got on my sabbatical is going to be nowhere near enough time, because I'm also planning to write a popular linguistics book. I shouldn't say that out loud, because that sort of makes it more real than it should be, but that's another thing I really want.
So there you go, everyone. That's a promise that David Adger will produce a pop linguistics book over the next couple of years. So you spoke a little bit about interdisciplinary work, and particularly work that you did connected to sociolinguistic variation or variation in general. And I think that's actually one of the strengths of our department, is that the sociolinguists and the people who are involved in what we might call formal linguistics or formal approaches to linguistics are, well, tend to work together quite well. We work in harmony. So I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit about what you thought that, what were what would be the attraction of joining the Queen Mary Linguistics Department? What have we got that other departments don't have, or why would someone want to do linguistics here?
I mean, it's a small department. It's bigger now than it was. But when I joined in 2002, it was at the same time as Colleen Cotter joined, and at that time, the only linguist that was here was Jenny Cheshire, sociolinguist. So Jenny, Colleen, and I were the first. I mean, adding Colleen and I to Jenny created a linguistics department, and that was a linguistics department, which of course consisted of a syntactician and 2 sociolinguists. Right. And so at the time, we kind of thought to ourselves, well, we could go down the lines of building a linguistics department along traditional lines, where it's like you have a phoneticist, a phonologist, a syntactician, a morphologist, and so on. But actually, we thought what we'd try and do is build on the strengths that we had. So we tried to build a group that was sort of centered around syntax, and a group that was sort of centered around sociolinguistics. We did try to include phonology at some point, but it just never quite worked. So, you know, we're not the strongest place in the world for phonology, but we are very, very strong in syntax, syntax semantics, syntax morphology, and also in sociolinguistics in all its domains, you know, stretching across aspects of variation theory, also interaction between sociolinguistics and pragmatics, sociolinguistics and discourse, even sociolinguistics and education and things like that. So we always had these 2 different main groups, and we built ourselves up over the years. We're now about 11 people, and we built ourselves up over the years around those 2 groups, and we recruited PhD students who were interested in working around those 2 areas. There's always been some connection between those 2 groups. So, you know, Jenny Cheshire and I have, for example, supervised students together. We've written papers together. We had a paper that came out in Lingua recently. A large group of the formal linguists recently got a large, part of a partnership in a large EU project looking at multilingualism, which of course connects sociolinguistic aspects of multilingualism with cognitive aspects, with theoretical aspects. So one of the things that I think differentiates our department from many other departments is that actually the sociolinguistics group and the formal linguistics group respect each other's work and talk to each other about each other's work. And that's something which is, I mean, rarer, certainly rarer than it should be. And I think that, you know, that makes it a really, really lovely department to work in, because people respect each other and they believe that what each other are doing is important. And so I think that, and I hope that the students get that as well. I mean, most students attach themselves obviously to, you know, one domain or the other, but all the students work together in our linguistics lab and talk to each other, and again, I hope also have that sense of respect for what each other are doing. So I think that that's one of the things that makes us a bit different. Not only do we have, well, I mean, not to blow my own trumpet, but looking at my colleagues, world-class researchers in linguistics, we also have world-class researchers in linguistics that get on with each other intellectually and respect each other's work intellectually in domains where that's not that common in linguistics.
I'm actually going to the sociolinguistics reading group today. So
there we go. There we go.
There you go. Perfect example.
Proof in the pudding. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, and the other thing, I mean, the other thing that's connected to that, I guess, is just, I mean, at least from my own personal perspective, some of the work that I've done in syntax could not have actually been done without working with sociolinguists, actually. So the work that I did with Jen Smith in Glasgow, who's currently in Glasgow, on microvariation in Bucky and looking at the particular patterns that she found there was absolutely crucial to my developing this theory which I call combinatorial variation, which is a kind of basic, I mean, it doesn't really add anything to syntactic theory, it just points out that the way that we set our syntactic theory up gives us a really great understanding of, well, it gives us at least potentially a great understanding of what is going on in individual level variation. And, you know, I would never have noticed that if I hadn't been working with sociolinguists. So I think that, you know, and I'm hoping that it can go the other way as well, that, you know, some of my work can enrich theirs as well. And I think that that's probably true from the Lingua paper that Jenny Cheshire, Sue Fox and I published a couple of years back, where we looked at the emergence of a new relativization strategy in teenage speech in Hackney, which wasn't happening in teenage speech in outer London, and we showed, and we connected that to the multilingualism in Hackney, but we also showed how there was a syntactic mechanism that could make sense of that. And I think, so those two things sort of reinforce each other, and I think that that's something that's pretty unique about this department.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you very much, David. I think
You're
that's everything I wanted to ask.
Great.
Okay, thanks for your time, and hopefully we'll have a series of these interviews with other members of the department as well. But you're first, so you should feel privileged.
Well, I'm on leave just now.
It makes it much easier. Yeah. Okay, thanks, David.
Bye.